Okay, welcome back. We're ready to go.
Hashtag
in our media fight. Lunch carbo coma. I can tell which one. I can tell which of you ate the cookies. I'll know in just about 30 minutes when that blood sugar goes. Just kidding. All right. So again, we're going to build on this. So I know some people are having a little trouble sort of homing in on what is that. You know, what is that one thing I want to work on? What is that one problem? What is the one thing? And that's okay. We can continue to sort of peel back the onion layers, I guess, so to speak, and narrow it down. Because again, the more specific we can be, the better. Because again, so, you know, the analogy of like, I want to get healthy. Okay, what does that mean? You know, like, unless we can say, you know, when people make those New Year's resolutions of, I'm going to get healthy this year. I'm going to lose 10 pounds by walking, you know, every day, or I'm going to, you know, when you can make it something very specific and concrete and trackable and things like that that you can measure. All right. So we're going to come back and you can keep thinking about the goals. Again, today I am humble enough to say I know I'm not going to solve the world's problems, but hopefully we can start the journey of thinking about it. All right. So I said the second piece of the thing was going to be audience, which in this case, of course, is our learners. Bunch of different ways that we can talk about audience, and a lot of times, you know, I'm sure many of you have done needs assessments, and, you know, who are the students and what is the demographics and the breakdown and all that. We're going to focus a little bit differently today because I'm going to take it, as I've been doing with the other things, we're going to take it from sort of a game design perspective. So I always start with this. Everyone is always motivated, 100%. Okay, so when we say the students just aren't motivated, what we're saying is the students aren't motivated to do what we want them to do, right? It's not that they're not motivated. They have no problem with motivation, trust me. Okay, so let's just start there. All right, so the proper question is not how we're going to motivate them. It's how are we going to create this environment in which they will be more likely to pursue the actions that we want them to take, okay? And we were talking about that a little bit over here. You know, the horse, we're dragging the horse to the water, and it's just not. We're doing everything. We're picking the water up, and we're putting it next to its mouth. Can't get quite to drink, so we're figuring that out. All right, so one of the, if you read anything about gamification, one of the things you are probably going to read about is going to be Richard Bartle's player types. This is probably the most cited thing in this area. And what he was studying was nothing to do with education. He's a professor, but he was studying a very specific type of game, and he was trying to describe these player types, what the motivations were of the players. And he came up, just for simplicity, it's a matrix, and with the 4 quadrants, which you can liken to a deck of cards, just to make it easy to remember. So everybody is a little bit of different things. Nobody is generally 100% in any of these, like any sort of matrix model that you've ever looked at. But just quickly, the achievers, of course, those are the people that, you know, they love the points and badges. They like those visual indicators that they're winning and that they're doing their thing, and they want all that. They want that. The explorers are those people who really like to discover. They hunt for all the Easter eggs. They look for everything. If you're ever beta testing, you desperately want one of them on your team because they will break everything for you. They're perfect. They're hard to find, unfortunately. They are hard to find. Then you have the socializers. Of course, these are the people who love people. They like playing games because they like interacting with the other people. They like helping other people, the whole thing. And then you have the killers, designated by the clubs, which, not quite that dramatic, but these are the people who really make your and everyone else's life hell because they want to win at all costs and, you know, no regard for anybody else. Luckily, they're a pretty small percentage. But when you encounter them, they feel like a really big percentage. But this was sort of the model that he came up with. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of people stop when they read stuff about Richard Bartle's work and when they think about player types and applying things in gamification. But what's interesting is what Richard Bartle was trying to do is very much what we're trying to do today. He was trying to encourage the game designers to make games that people wanted to play. Because especially in the early days, game designers built games because they liked games. So they built games that they liked and that they wanted to play with not much thought. Okay? So same thing with the learning. As I said, we're always flipping it around. Okay, what does this mean to the learner? So we want to be designing, not because it's what we want to be in the class, you know. It's like, what do we want for the learners? So I think that's kind of interesting that, you know, we kind of have to look at what his intention was, which is actually closer to what we're talking about. Now, his model has been expanded and changed over time. There's other people who have expanded on it. Andrzej Barszewski's one of them. He expanded it to 6 player types, and he matched them up with motivations, which is what's kind of interesting here. So the achievers, they're focused on the mastery. The free spirits, like autonomy. So again, when you say, oh, but I don't know what my learners are. Do I know? Is my learner a philanthropist, a disruptor? I don't know. Well, the disruptors you usually know, but the other ones you might not know. And that's okay, because again, this is starting out as just a thought sort of experiment. You're going to have people that are going to be a little bit of all of these. And so what this is saying is these are needs, these are motivation needs we need to think about when we are designing. So if we design only for mastery, and obviously learning, that is one of our key focuses. We want to make sure they learn the material. But we need to also make sure that we're addressing these other things. Do they understand the purpose? Does it relate to something for them? Quite often these things are so abstract in terms of their experience. I know, way back to school, you know, I'm never going to use algebra. Why do I need to learn this? This doesn't. So we need to help them find those connections. We need to be cognizant of that. And the chart on the right side, what's kind of interesting is he has, and I put the link in your workbooks. You can go take this player type survey yourself and find out where you land. But this is from thousands of people who have filled it out. And people go, oh yeah, but this is probably just gamers, they like games, and so these results don't really match up with anything in the real world. But there's another group that their entire business is built around the fact that they study gamer motivation, but they have mapped it very closely to, that's your personality. If you were competitive in the game space, you were competitive. It's not like people suddenly, oh, when I play a game, I'm really competitive, but it's like, I don't really care. I don't really care if I get a good grade. No, it's okay, really, it's okay. They really do kind of match up. So you can actually use these to kind of get some insights about people, about learner psychology in general. So anyway, so this is another model that was used. And again, I don't like to get hung up with models because I like to use them for awareness, not this is like gospel and we need to follow this and we need to address each of these. That's not really the point here. And that's just also, that's his book he wrote, because I got it included because the title's just fun. It's a very short book. It actually is a pretty good introduction if you know, zips through really pretty quickly, but he covers a lot of the stuff that I talked about today with his own spin on it. And then also another book that if you want to get into reading more about gamification comes from Yu-Kai Chow. He travels all over the world. He's probably one of the earliest and biggest gamification guys. He's not just specifically, neither of them are specifically just in the education space. They work with all sorts of different clients. But he has created his own model based on core drives that he has uncovered. And many of these you will notice are things we've already talked about. So not breaking a whole lot of new ground here, but I would recommend the book. But these are things that, you know, he's like, okay, you know, you got to balance them out. Like, does your, you know, if what you're trying isn't working, maybe look at this. Maybe you're focusing entirely on the creativity part, but it doesn't give them enough social. Or maybe, you know, maybe scarcity and impatience. You know, sometimes scarcity and impatience are really good. We're going to talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations in a minute, But scarcity and those bottom ones fall into the extrinsics usually. And generally those are not favored because they have very short-term usage. But for a little short-term burst, they can actually be very effective. So, that fear of missing out, there's a time limit on something. Getting them, that'll get them sort of spurred into action. Intrinsic motivation is the golden standard here, but intrinsic motivation does not have a good timeline. It kind of happens whenever, right? Extrinsic sometimes is needed to kind of kick it into action. So again, that's just something to think about, some of the core drives, and like I said, we've talked about most of those by now. So again, with the intrinsic and extrinsic, I was talking with people over here, and I'm not saying that extrinsic is always bad. Sometimes you do need it. I would say generally a good rule of thumb is this a one-time thing? So it's like something I just need them to do once, and then they've done it, and whatever. Might be a good place for some extrinsics, because there's not a whole lot of intrinsic motivation to it. I got to do this. If it's like filling out some application or something, you got to do it. If you can get them over the hump, that's great. So generally, if there's not a lot of other motivation already in play, and then be aware that they're not two separate things. Generally, people are complex, and they do things for a multitude of reasons. So for example, I'm coming to college because I want a degree. That's an extrinsic. Somebody's going to give me a degree, hopefully, when I do what I need to do. But intrinsically, I want to improve. I want to feel smart. I want to, advance. I'm curious. Those are all intrinsic things. So they don't act completely independently. There's going to be some overlap back and forth. All right. And again, we talked earlier about the extrinsics being like a cup of coffee. So now Louis back because he decided this was the part he wanted to tell you about because this related to wolves. So, so Louis wants to explain to you self-determination theory. And this is really at the heart of these intrinsic things. And it's made up of 3 pieces. And Louis wanted me to tell you that, autonomy, people, we think about as, people having control. I'm kind of out there like the lone wolf. He's like, he explained to me what a lone wolf really means. He's like, it's not really appropriate in most contexts that people use it. But he's like, but yes, we do all need freedom. We like to be able to explore. We like to be able to make some choices for ourselves. So those are all important things with the autonomy. The mastery. The reason that the lone wolf is usually stronger and more aggressive is because they've had to master more skills because they're out there on their own. So they have to learn some of those things that they wouldn't have to learn otherwise. See, I didn't know all this about wolves and stuff. So. And then finally the connectedness, because wolves are, of course, pack animals by nature, and we need those social interactions. Okay. So if you can build in things. And we're going to talk about some elements that match up better or worse than others with these. But if you can use these 3, you will often find that you've hit that very sweet spot. And again, it doesn't have to be something major. The mastery thing may just be, maybe they are getting it, but they don't perceive that they are. And so by giving them a way to track their progress, or the autonomy, maybe one method is just not working for somebody, and so if we give them a choice and they try out a different way, that may make more sense to them, or it may be more comfortable for them to learn it in that way. So, something to think about with that. Couple of examples that I've seen recently. The University of Michigan actually has a MOOC called Gainful Learning, and they talk about some of these same topics in a slightly different way. But what's interesting about what they did was there's 8 modules to their course. The first 2 modules, Core 1 and Core 2, those are required. Everybody who takes the class has to do Core 1 and Core 2. And then Module 8 is a core module. Everyone has to complete Core 8. Now, in the meantime, there's 5 other options in here. Okay? You choose 3 of them. You don't have to do all of them. You choose 3 of them. So now each student is creating their own learning plan. They're finding their own pathway, which topics within this larger thing are most relevant to them. So that's a concept that I've seen work very well in a lot of contexts. Everything, not making everything required. Giving them some wiggle room there in the middle. Because again, this is, I gotta make sure they got the basics. If they don't have the basics, they're probably not gonna get very far with any of this. So I got the basics, and then up here at the top, we all have to come back together and make sure that we got it, that we got whatever the larger topic was. But maybe here in the middle, maybe I got a little wiggle room here. Maybe I don't have to have everybody do the exact same pathway. Or some people may choose to do option 3 before option 2. That may be okay depending on how you lay it out. So giving them some flexibility. And I know then people get worried, they're like, oh, that's more work for me, I'm going to be grading more things. Well, not necessarily. If I do option 2 first, and Judy does option 3, and so you have to grade her option 3 and my option 2, you're still grading one thing for each of us. You're not grading any more stuff. There's not any more work necessarily for you. So this is kind of a model that's kind of an interesting thing to consider. I've seen variations of this that are actually kind of cool. Okay. We put my zip drive into his, and apparently there's a font issue there. These actually, see, if you read this ancient alien language, you would know that this says module 1, module 2.
Explain the symbols at the end.
So we will assume that that's what that says. But again, one of the things that I encourage people to do as they get into gamification is to play games. Play them. Just play them. I have yet to find too many people who are very successful with gamification that don't play them, because that says you kind of don't have an appreciation for it. You don't really have that sort of gainful, vibe to you, and it makes it harder to pull it off in a realistic, authentic way. That I'm gonna gamify my class, but I've never played a game in my life. That just kind of, it's hard. It's hard to make that work. So I encourage you, and as part of your participation today, this is my little infomercial. I have a 2-part webinar that I am going to offer to all of you that you can view. That is about, it's called Purposeful Play, and it's about taking games, playing them, and sort of how to giving you a little bit of guidance about dissecting them and what to look for and maybe how to approach it and things like that. So you'll be getting information about that and whatever. So I do play a lot of games just for the fun of it, but also because I'm looking for those golden nuggets. I'm looking for those ideas of how could I take this and maybe tweak it a little bit to make it something that I could use in a class. And that's where this came from. This is actually combining a concept from a game with a standard grading rubric. So standard grading rubric, we got 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 in this case, whatever. Taking that same sort of model. In this case, actually, the problem was similar to the last one. Does everybody need, in this case, 4-star proficiency on every task in this course? And the answer was no. The answer was there are certain things that I need everybody to be at 4-star proficiency for. There are certain topics that, as long as they have the gist of it, as long as they have some basic knowledge of it, that's good enough. I get a 2, fine. Here I maybe only got 3 out of 4, that's fine. So taking that idea of a game where, okay, every level I don't have to get 3 stars, unless you're really anal like some of us. It hurts you when you don't. But sort of translating that into this idea of okay, total, I need to score 20, let's say, or whatever the number is. But, so I have to get 20 total. Maybe I have to do this one, I have to do that one. So that's 8 of my points. But then I can kind of mix and match, and I can, as the learner, I can kind of, make the decisions about, okay, this topic, I'm not really good at that one, or I don't really like that one, or whatever the case is. And then they can play around a little bit with those other ones. And they still, again, we're not dumbing it down, we're not making it easier, we're just saying, you have a little bit of option here. And it also keeps them a little more motivated, because if I do get stuck on one of those topics, okay, maybe I didn't quite get this one, but as long as it's not a skill that I absolutely need to get to the next skill, it might be okay. This might be okay. So just something to think about. All right. So that's actually, those slides kind of give you maybe a little, you could put those sort of in the autonomy. If we're going back to Louis' lesson on self-determination, those would fall sort of in the autonomy category. Now, as far as mastery, one of the reasons I really encourage, I've encouraged like beginning instructional designers particularly to play some of these games is because they do such a beautiful job of scaffolding. So this, I see lots of happy faces. I know many of you have played this game, Plants vs. Zombies, or some variation of it. But what's beautiful about this game is you start out with one item. You start out with you start with the pea shooter, and then you get a sunflower, and you've got these different zombies, and they come and they're attacking, and you have to protect your house, and so you have to figure out where to plant them. And you may not get it right on the first try, and you try it again, and you try it again. And then as you get better, you get other plants, and you get other things that you can plant in your yard to protect yourself. And then you get more and more different kinds of zombies. And then some things only work against some kind of zombies. So now we've got the whole critical thinking going, because now I got to figure out, okay, which plants am I going to plant, because I know I got this kind of zombie to fight, as opposed to the next level where maybe I have a different zombie and I need a totally different set. So games like this may on the surface look, sort of just silly and fun and whatever, but it's actually a lot of critical, complex thinking going into these things. But what I like about them, like I said, especially for people starting out, is showing them that progression of, don't give them everything at once. Give them this one thing. Give them this one resource and see, what can I do with that? And now I layer it on, and I layer and I build and I build and I build. So this would go in that mastery. This would be sort of an example of getting an idea for mastery from one of these games. Another one for mastery, has anybody here tried to learn a language using Duolingo? Or heard of Duolingo? You've used it? Okay. How did you like it?
It's fun.
It's fun? Okay. Did you learn the language?
No.
Did you stick with it?
Maybe for like a month at a time.
Okay.
Here.
Okay. So you didn't have a real need to learn, you just kind of for fun, it'd be good to learn another language. Okay. People who are seriously in need of learning a new language and they need to do it in a compressed time frame, not to put any language professors out of work or anything, but people using this, students using this have gotten to the same sort of mastery in about 30 hours that it takes like a whole semester in a course. I mean, you can really ramp up. You can really ramp up the rate at which you do it. And Duolingo is one of the most gamified apps out there. They do it beautifully. They keep building on it, which is, again, going back to that notion of it's not one and done. They are constantly upgrading it and changing it. What I love about this slide was, this was from the Spanish class. They give you these spaced repetitions, right? And we all know that's important for. That's the other thing. We're going to talk about that again. Elaine brought it up a little bit. That sort of constant, drive up the hill. What they do is, and again, the technology enables all of this. They track all of the words that they offer you in the lessons. Any word that you have encountered in a lesson, they track. When you used it, did you get the answer right? Did you not get the answer right? They track all of that. And then they build these mastery bars. So, okay, at this point, for Libros, 3 months ago, whenever that was, that one was good. So that, that one probably had come up in the questions repeatedly, and I got it right, let's say. Some of the others, okay, this one maybe I haven't worked on as much, so it's a little bit lower. And it keeps, it keeps track of all of this. They also have badges. They have all sorts of other game elements in there. But what I really like is this notion of that they do beautifully this whole spaced repetition thing, and bringing back around things that maybe you had trouble with, introducing it again, doing it slightly differently, maybe not giving the exact same sentence, but a slightly different sentence. So anyway, so a lot of powerful stuff. So even if you're not interested in learning a language, it's kind of an interesting experience to look at. And they now have a new app they just brought out called Tiny Cards, where it's a series of flashcards. It's a mobile app flashcard app. So the other one from Duolingo, just here, oh, you made the owl cry because you haven't practiced lately. So that goes back to that idea we talked about the hints and the nudges and the whatever. It's tracking. Oh, you didn't come to class. Like, don't you want to come to class? So it's just that. It also has the, I don't think I have it on any of those, but they have a feature. They have that feature or variation of it that I mentioned earlier, where you get points. You get points for taking the lessons and for completing things and whatever, and then you can purchase. So maybe it's encouraging you to practice every day, but maybe you know you're traveling this weekend and you're going to be out of town. It lets you buy like a free day, so you won't get dinged on your trend. Because otherwise, then you got to go back to the beginning. Oh, I did 6 days in a row, and now I'm back to nothing. So again, it has a lot of very subtle. But I think what I particularly like about theirs, and I talked about this individually with some of you, they don't use even the points and badges and things they use. They're very careful how they use them. They're not. They do get around the demotivation pretty well. They do a pretty good job of really tying it to something that is meaningful to you. So like the streak thing, it's like they want you to practice not because, they want you to use the app, but because learning a new language does require, the best way to do it is that continuous repetition and going over it. And if you don't do it on a steady basis, you don't have as good of an experience learning the language. So the nudges they're doing are, tied specifically to that. It's not just we want you to come play our game every day. It's actually tied to the learning objective. All right.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
If I'm using it here on my phone, if you were to assign this to a student, how, and say it's an online course, how do you know the student's progress? And does it send you a report?
That's a good question. I think there is. I think there is a way that they can.
Is that built into the program?
I think there is a feature built into it. I'm going to check for you guys because I know that people have used it in that way. I can't remember if it's something the student just shows you the report. I think the student
Scouts honor type thing.
Well, no, but I think the student can show you and present. Here's my statistics showing I practice blah 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 or whatever. But I'm trying to remember if they had a specific, because they did change a lot of their stuff in their program recently, and there may be a way to tap into that more easily that I'm not thinking of right now. But that's a great question.
I think they had like a student learner module.
That's what I'm trying to remember.
Like you had the one parent with all the child.
I think they do. I want to say they do, and I'm trying to. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look it up. Okay, that's some of my homework. All right, this is the quote I mentioned earlier about them being deliberate practice machines in this sense of, they really do encourage you to keep coming back, and you do stop playing once you got it. That's often when people stop playing whatever game it is. It's like, okay, I get it. This is the same thing over and over, and okay, I got it. All right, now. As far as audience, I'll tell you the good, I'll tell you the bad, I'll tell you the ugly. We've talked about throughout the day a little bit. Not everything is going to work for everybody. But when you know who your learners are, and we're going to dig into that in just a minute, you know there are certain things that are not going to work. Don't torture them with it. Please do not, in the sake of, oh, this is going to be fun. No, it's not going to be fun, and it's not going to be pretty. I worked on a project with an outside training company, and they were going into an environment where there were some very different, distinct learning populations. And they decided to go in with the same course for all of them. And I told them this is not going to work. I know these people, this is not going to work. And they said, oh no, it's fine. It's going to be fun. It's really not going to be fun. And what it was is it was teaching people how to use a new phone system. So you had some employees, like executives, who, what do they do with the phone? They answer, they make a phone call, maybe check their voicemail. There's not much they do with the phone. Okay. That was one learner population. And many of the learners in that population were, if not millennials, they were younger, they were very technologically savvy. So, okay, it's a new phone, show me the two things I need and I'm good to go. Okay. In that same organization, they had hundreds of support staff, like secretaries and different things like that. And some of the secretaries had up to 20 phone lines on their phones. Hanging up on a customer would be a bad thing, right? We can all kind of agree on that, right? So they were in a highly stressed, highly panicked mode when they came into training. And when they walked in and they were told that they were going to be answering phone lines for Batman and Superman, there was almost a revolt. They were just like, are you kidding me? This is not good. So whenever possible, and we don't always know who every audience member is going to be, but if you know, you got to be mindful of that, and you need to, work around that. And if you have a population that is going to be very mixed, that's one of those places where it becomes increasingly important that you do offer them those options. So maybe some of them, that's fine. Some of them love Batman and Superman, and that's okay. But if they don't, this is just going to add another layer of, cognitive fuzz, and nothing's going to get through there because they're just going to be so resistant to it. So it's a desperate plea to know your audience and accordingly. Now, this is the flip side of that. This was another, and this would sort of fall into that in the self-determination. This would fall into the connectedness and relatedness phase. That same customer service course that I showed you the checklist from earlier, we had a feature where participants from the last class got to leave messages for the next class. And this was really, really popular. And I've used it in a couple of things since then. Because, we think about that. Students come, they're very siloed, they're in that one session. And I was so frustrated. When I was in graduate school, I was like, there's like 5 other sessions in this class. Why can't I talk to any of these people? But I was like in this one little online place, and I couldn't talk to anybody else. So what we did was we had people leave messages for the next class, and none of them were like, "Here's how you pass the test." They were instructional. They were perhaps going back to that notion of helping the learners to plan how to succeed in this class. Because I've done it, I got through it, it's okay, it's going to be hard at the beginning, it's good, And some of the messages were very, we didn't edit any of them. We left them just as they came in. Luckily, we didn't get any that needed to be edited. we didn't have to censor anybody. But they were they were very helpful to the students coming in because they felt like they had some connection to other people have done this. It's doable. That makes it doable. Somebody else has done this. We like that as human beings. We like to know that somebody else has gone through whatever we went through. So this was just really what, and I loved. I put this one in because I always love this one. We termed this the yoga whippy. You only get out what you put in, but that affectionately became our yoga whippy. We wanted to have a little mascot, the yoga whippy. But we thought that'd be fun. So anyways, yeah, it'd be cute. Yoga whippy. So anyway, so something like that might be helpful. Again, it doesn't always have to be social interaction between people within the class. How can you foster communication and the social contact outside of the class? Maybe they could find an expert to, ask a question, or they have to go on Twitter and they have to find 5 people who are in that field and they, can follow them or, get something. The possibilities are endless depending on what you're trying to do. but just try to think about building that social out beyond. And I was talking to my library crew over here, and they had some good luck with one of their previous initiatives, getting students to help them sort of get some buzz going in things. And I was saying another thing you can do, sort of in line with this, is I've seen people build activities and put them on little cards. You could use this for a whole host of different topics. And so I complete the activity, whatever it is, and I turn it in, and then I come over and I hand you the card. Now you have to go do it. And you pass the activities around and you get the different students, and so you get this nice little sort of network going, and the experiences and shared experiences and getting different perspectives on it. So there's lots of different ways to build those little connections and webs and things like that. Okay. All right. So next thing we're going to do, and this is in your workbook. If you want to scribble on the page that I left you some space, or wherever you want to scribble is fine with me. That's going to be on pages 21 and 22, 20 and 21. What I encourage you to do is we're going to spend a couple of minutes. Let's see, we'll do about 10 minutes maybe. You can look through that list of, gives you some suggested questions, things to think about, whatever. Building personas is something that can be very helpful. Because again, I don't want you to think like, okay, I have to worry about autonomy, and I have to worry about relatedness, and I have to worry about all these things. That gets a little too abstract. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a character. We're going to create a persona that represents, this is not an actual student, we're not modeling it off of one particular student, but think about the students you've had in recent times or right now, and we're going to find some common things about them. Okay, this is probably something I would shoot for, represent sort of maybe 20% would be a good ballpark. We're going to create a persona that represents a group of your students. If you were going to create a character, what do you know about that person? And some of this you're speculating. Obviously, it's not a real person. So let's spend a few minutes, look at the list of questions, think about not just if they're male or female or how old or whatever, but like who are they and what might motivate them? What might be some of their challenges? If you had a lot of students that you knew have a lot of outside responsibilities, they're caretakers. I've worked with some groups that have a lot of older students, and they have, they're taking care of children and parents. How does that affect my learning? How does that affect how I can approach this? Am I ever going to have time to sit down and watch a 2-hour-long lecture? No, probably not. So take a look at those, and let's kind of come up with a backstory, so to speak, for that might be one of your types of students, not a particular student, just a type of student. And then that's going to help us to make some decisions in the next section about what elements we might add. Please, would you introduce me to your student?
Okay, my student's name is Julian.
Julian.
He's 25 years old. He's from Lermatar.
Okay. I don't know where that is.
It's between
It's
here
down
and
south.
Sapporo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's a little farming community.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay. He
Awesome.
speaks both English and Spanish. He loves rodeo bull riding, and he loves Indian music.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
And he's an undergraduate freshman, full-time.
Okay.
He's currently majoring in business. His prior knowledge, so he's in my math class.
Okay.
He made, B's and C's in high school math,
Okay.
but he tested into our intermediate algebra class.
Very nice. Okay.
The reason he's taking this class is because it's prerequisite for all of his college math. And he's very comfortable with technology,
Okay.
as most millennials are.
Okay.
Not all, but most. He's not very self-directed.
Aha. Okay. That's a clue.
Especially in terms of,
Okay.
and his need, he just wants to get through this class because his parents want him to get a college degree because no one in his family's had a college degree before.
Wow.
And he's going to be the one that's going to do
He's going to
it.
be it. There's a lot of pressure there.
And so he doesn't really have a clear goal. He's just going to get a college degree.
Okay.
He's in business right now, but
Mm.
he'd really rather go ride bulls and listen to Indian music.
Okay. I love it. I love it.
And he's very social. He'll get up
Very
and walk
social.
around talking to people.
Oh.
You know, they're alert.
Oh, so he's a little disruptive. Okay, so it's not just social learning. Okay. Okay. Excellent. So yeah. So I heard some challenges in there because when I was self-directed, you may have a little trouble, self-control and restraint, disturbing others, whatever. I hear there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure there. Right. He's the first one in the family. Okay. That could definitely impact his learning and what might be interesting to him. Okay. So when we get into the next section, you stick with Julian and you let me know what we're going to try to come up with some things that we think might engage Julian. How what might work for him, what might not. Okay, so that's great. Okay. Does anybody else have a student they would like to introduce me to? Yes.
Okay, playing the numbers from my students now.
Okay.
Her name is Maria,
Maria.
because a large number.
That's a common. I would suspect that would be a common. Yes.
She is 26. I had her from Belen.
Okay.
She's taking this class because she wants to be a nurse.
Okay, so she has a bigger purpose. Okay.
But she's convinced that she's not going to, she already knows that she's going to fail the class.
Ooh. Okay. Okay.
And doesn't think she needs to know it anyway to begin with.
Ah, okay, so that's an interesting twist. Okay. All right.
She has a daughter.
Ah, she's okay. So again, we got some
She's a single
competing.
mom, or does she?
She's got some competing stuff
I
going there.
don't know that much about her. I just know.
Okay, just those time.
So Maria might very well have a friend named Franny, who's in my class,
Okay.
who commutes from Socorro,
Okay.
which is about an hour away.
Yeah.
She knows a little Spanish.
Okay.
She's 33. If she's asked her hobbies and interests, she just kind of looks at you because mostly she's busy taking care of her kids. She's taking classes part-time. She's undecided. Prior knowledge with the subject matter. So way back in grade school, she had a really good English class. She wrote a story, it won an award, everything.
Oh, wow.
But she hated English after that, and she didn't complete high school.
Ooh.
She has to take the classes as required.
Yeah.
She is not that comfortable with computers. Her teenager knows way more than she does.
Mm.
She is self-directed in some ways and not in other ways. She's a perfectionist. She's got to get an A. She's got to do everything just perfect. But she kind of wants to be told what to do because she's not really sure what she should do. She would say herself that she doesn't have good grammar and can't write. Although she's got a really good imagination, but that's me. So, non-school responsibilities, job, family, community responsibilities, yeah, she's got all of them. She wants to be a role model to her kids. She wants a job that pays. She doesn't know what that job is yet.
Okay.
Special skills, she's a volunteer at the elementary school. She's organized Girl Scouts and cookie sales. She's a mom. She's learned to say no. She's divorced. She's a recovering addict with a lot of self-knowledge as a result.
Wow.
Learning obstacles. She has a fixed mindset. She doesn't have much practice as a writer. She has a learning disability, kind of attention stuff.
Ooh.
She needs glasses and she doesn't have them.
Wow.
That's a composite of a lot of
That, I know that's
Only
That's
you
a
could
lot
have
going
come
on,
up with all
but
that
that's
detail,
actually,
right?
that's right. But when was the last time you really sat down and thought about that when you were working on putting together a lesson plan? Did you really think about the students who were going to be, did you really kind of at that level? Maybe you have, it's okay if you say yes or okay. It's not a right or wrong answer. But a lot of times we don't. A lot of times we don't kind of really, wow, that's, there's a lot competing in their brains for whatever. But there's in each one of your stories, what I loved was there were some very tangible things we can hook onto. Some very strong things we can hook onto. Yours, she wants some structure. So, okay, yeah, we're gonna, so also, and several of you, a lot of competing things going on. Can we make small mods? Can we give them bite-sized things? Because bite-sized things add up. They're actually easier for them to process. I mean, there's cognitively anybody, even if you didn't have a lot of stuff processed, but just cognitively, if we can break it up and have them go through that process of doing small things, maybe some spaced repetition, things like that, they're going to get it, and then they're going to get a little more confidence. We got the one over here that doesn't believe she can do it, so she's going to definitely need some indicators. She's going to need something that helps her see that, okay, maybe I can. But she wants to be a nurse. There's something there. There's some calling. She's got some sort of, need to serve, to help. We can play off of that perhaps. So all of these, you start to find as you sort of think about these fictional people, they actually almost become real. And you can start to see, oh, okay, well, this is the challenge they have. How can I help them over that challenge? All right. Now, we just did one in the interest of time and things like that. If you were doing this, if you wanted to do this activity probably more realistically, you would create several, because that would give you a more rounded picture of your class as a whole. And you would start to see, okay, there's some things that are going to overlap. So, okay, here's something that I think will work for a bunch of the different people. But then you can throw in those little pieces that maybe only appeal to a smaller population, but that's okay, as long as they can be managed in sort of a not everything required, or in how you position the choices or how you lay things out. That sometimes offers them enough differentiation that they can sort of make their own sort of lesson plan within the larger lesson plan. And also, there's lots of nice things in there, making assignments that, like, I love yours, when they go out and they have that real world scenario of, somebody ate the candy, got sick, and how do I, who do I talk to? How do I find a solution without, and she gave them some limitations. Limitations are really clever when you create activities. Sometimes we make activities that are really, sometimes we want to create activities that leave a lot of openness and ambiguity, like my number. Sometimes we want them to be a little bit vague, because we want to let the learner have some freedom where they go with it, how they interpret it, and that's okay. Sometimes you actually want to do the reverse. Sometimes you can create the most interesting and the most creative things by giving them some limitations. So, for example, very sort of famous example, actually. Has anybody here read the book, The Cat in the Hat? Or heard of it? Maybe. In that book, the reason he wrote the book was that his publisher came to him and said, right now what we got is these old Dick and Jane books, and they're really boring, and the kids don't like them, and nobody wants to learn to read. I need you to create a book that kids will want to read. Okay, so that was the problem. We want to get kids to read. So he gave Dr. Zeus a list, and I think it was like 345 words. And those were 345 words that any second grader should be able to read by the time they finish that grade. And that's what he used. He had a limitation of this set of words. And he went through the list, and the first two words on the list that rhymed were cat and hat. And so the Cat in the Hat was born. And he used about 250, I think 260 of the words on the required vocabulary list for second graders in that book. So it was by having that limitation of you can only use these resources, you only have these things to work with. And often your students will come up with all sorts of amazing things, because now we've got some constraints, and yours had the constraints. They couldn't use the computer, and what was the other one? Couldn't ask a pharmacist. So she constrained them, but then within that, like, the sky's the limit, and they will go in all sorts of different directions. And usually more interesting directions than if you just kind of, okay, kid got sick after eating candy at Halloween, and what do you do? They probably would not have come up with nearly as creative a solution if they had not had some constraints. So that's also another way to make things a little more interesting. All right. Ginger ale. Crackers and ginger ale. All right. Any other thoughts, questions about the audience? Yes.
I was thinking about, as you were asking, what does our audience generally look like?
Yeah.
And I thought I was focusing so much on what it generally looks like that I forgot about the outliers.
Mm-hmm.
As I look at your avatars there, I was thinking about the older gentlemen that we sometimes don't think about, especially when technology is involved, and even gaming and making things, I don't want to say childish, but more in child's play, where somebody from an older generation might think like, I don't want anything to do with this.
Did you see his picture before you made that avatar?
I have not. And he sat right in front there. So he is the persona. He is the
Can I
persona.
ask you a question?
Yes.
Would you use this kind of activity with the students when we do like an introduction to the course?
Interesting.
Have them fill it.
You certainly could. You certainly could.
And we ask questions like this in classrooms, and why do you want to be this? Give me all your deep reasons. And they all seem to mirror each other, which would be kind of fun to see if you had them bring it. Fill this thing out, bring it. And it's anonymous. So we don't have to put a name to the face. We can figure it out, but
Yeah, and you might want to. I would probably make it obviously fewer things. But I mean, more generic things like maybe it's nursing. Like, oh, do you have a story of when a pharmacist, you had to go see the pharmacist and you had a good experience, or create some sort of open question like that. Because that way there's definitely going to get it. They all come up with the same story for that one. But thinking about, so it ties their real life, their personality a little bit, get it tied to the topic somehow a little bit. But yeah, there's certainly nothing wrong with the catch there, of course, is if you're going to get that information from them, then you have to have the expectation with yourself that you are going to adjust course. Maybe you already have your course kind of laid out and you're like, this is how it goes. You may have to adjust course at that point. So it makes it a little, that's a little more challenging for you perhaps. You might discover some things. But again, you don't have to adjust course day one. You got weeks to, kind of find those little activities or those little things that work in. But yeah, sure. I mean, that's what I'm saying, that we talked about earlier, that introductory activity, whatever that looks like in your course. Think about some variations to that. What, maybe that might be a clever way to do it. What information can I get?
For instance, I teach a class and the students are very different this semester than they've been in ages. And they're very in tune and they're very assertive and they actually do the readings. And so it's kind of they're delightful. I've had to change how I teach because
you didn't expect that.
I had no idea. And so something like this might give me an idea.
Absolutely.
Because they're unique and they're delightful.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be boring them. So I have to come up with more clever stuff to keep them engaged.
I think that's right. And like I said, when I asked about the exit tickets earlier, some activity like that, you can just pose a question at the end of a session. It could be related to the actual stuff you talked about. It could be a question that sort of opens up a new discussion. It could be a question that is sort of a fact-finding thing for you. It could tie in with some even some event that's coming up or something. Halloween's coming up. Maybe it's what was you could just even to help with the social part, what was your favorite costume, or if you could whatever. You'd be amazed what you can find out and kind of get some insights and things like that. So yeah, I could sort of sprinkle them in there. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Anybody else? Oh, I'm such a I love this. I just want to stay here. Can I stay here? That was such a great group. Any other thoughts or questions? And I made Elaine both giggle and rant, so my day is good. My day is good. All right. Okay. So let's move on to the mechanics piece. Okay, this is where it can both get really complicated, or it can shake things out pretty well. So in terms of mechanics, I told you the goose story earlier. So in terms of our story, would we say that at the end of the day, points, badges, and leaderboards, are they heroes or villains? They're just tools. Both. Both. I heard both. I would put them in the both category, right? Okay?
Yes.
They're not all, again, we're back to the intrinsic, extrinsic argument sort of thing. It's not all or nothing. It's, my sort of golden rule is it purposeful? Is there a meaning? Not to you, is there a meaning to the learner? And you would be amazed. Like you mentioned, older students. Don't make assumptions. Many of the older students will be your biggest gamers. Things like that. Or, we all think millennials are technologically savvy. They think they are because I know how to use a phone. I know how to Snapchat. But that doesn't necessarily know, or they might know how to use Twitter, but they don't know how to use it in a way that furthers their learning. So just because I know how to post a message to Twitter doesn't mean that I have sort of that critical thinking part of it of, okay, how can I use this as a tool to my learning? And some people suggest that that's actually the new gap. The new gap was not the digital divide, although we were talking over here earlier about the lack of internet, among many students. But even beyond that, the bigger divide increasingly is knowing how to use the technology in a meaningful way. So they may have the internet, but if I'm using the internet just to, Facebook, chat with my friends, or whatever, there's value to that, but that's not necessarily the whole thing. All right. So again, points are not all bad, but if you ever watch the show Whose Line Is It Anyway, you recognize Drew Carey. Everything is made up, and the points don't matter, right? So I could give all of you today, I could say, I'm giving you all 2,500 points. And you'd be like, okay. Yay! I don't know. Like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, right? I have no context for it. It doesn't mean anything. So if the points are simply, if we're trading our traditional grading scale for a point scale for the sake of trading it because we heard points were cooler, that's not going to get us anywhere, not in the long run, okay? And I did notice I don't know about anybody in this room because I didn't memorize whose was whose. I did see on some of the syllabi that people had gone to like a cumulative point total. Like there's 600 points in this class, and so yeah, so I did see that, that part, and I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm just saying we can't stop there. That's not going to solve it. Yes?
So I'm definitely, I love this, and I'm definitely with them. I don't like even doing points. I will sometimes joke to my students, hey, you get extra points for that. And then I say, have you read the syllabus? Have you seen that I don't use points?
Right.
And then leaderboard that. But the badge thing, I am still trying to think, I'd like to do something like badges just as a way of acknowledging and the students having something concrete to look at and oh, this is cool, and I figured this out.
You are totally on.
But here's my question.
Yeah.
I have not figured out where to put the dang things.
Yeah.
Are they going to be real, and are they going to wear them? Give me a break. They're not Girl Scouts. They don't have the little, blazer thing they can put them on. I was a Girl Scout. I know that it worked. So having even, if they're given a thing that's nice, but they're not going to keep it, they're going to lose it, whatever. I would. If they're virtual,
yeah.
Where do we put it then? Our Blackboard Learn does not provide a convenient spot to put such things. I don't really think they're going to want to post them to Facebook or whatever.
Okay.
I don't know where to put them, but I want to have something like that.
Yes.
Do I just maybe stick colored stars on the papers? You got an orange star because you figured out how to use commas. What? I don't know. What?
Get ready for
Maybe
arguments about those two.
Yeah.
You know, just make them run around, and once they have
Share
like
with
20
the
stars on
students.
their face,
And put them in there.
No, I have.
What?
I use Google Drive though.
I'll teach you.
Okay.
We do have access to OneNote. There might be something through OneNote. I'd have to look.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to come back and ask you a question about that in a minute. I'm going to do badges in 1 second, so you can hold the question for just
Right,
1
right,
second.
That's a big question. A lot
Yes.
of us want the answer.
I like his idea. They can stick them on their foreheads.
There you go.
Yeah.
Some people do. And you were nice enough to give me a small tour, so I happen to know what your space looks like over there.
It's my classroom. I'm worried about her.
No, I know, but they would come over here.
They could come.
They could come over here if we gave them a reason to, which might pull them into another activity, which again, okay, so I'm coming back to that one. I'm coming back to that one in 1 second. I'm just going to finish my rant about points first. All right. Again, I think all of you are already on board with this, but I don't want people, as I was saying before, like, don't underestimate the value that the learners ascribe to things.
Right.
Okay? So, did anybody ever see the movie Up in the Air? It was George Clooney.
It's a good movie.
Oh, it has a ton of really awesome, like, unintentional insults in there.
Yeah. So, but at one point they're having dinner, and she's asking him about the fact that he puts everything. He doesn't do anything that doesn't go on his credit card because he gets points for it, right? Loyalty points. He gets points. And at one point he says he has a goal of 10 million, and she says, "Isn't 10 million just a number? Like, it has no meaning to her. It has no meaning." She's like, "I don't mean to belittle your collection, okay?" And again, we shouldn't belittle. Collections are big for people. And that's what one of the things that we're going to talk about badges. Badges work because people like to see visual evidence that they did things, that they did them.
Especially when we went on flights, this is the first movie that popped in my head whenever I started seeing like American Airlines go like, collect your points.
Collect your points. This is what you're thinking of. But what was his answer? His answer was really interesting. His answer was, I'd be the 7th person to do it.
Yep.
There was a special status attached to that 10 million number. It wasn't 10 million just because it was a number.
Yep.
To him, it meant something.
Right.
So sometimes, unintentionally even sometimes, we create these systems and we don't think that they mean anything to the learners. And sometimes they start ascribing meaning to these things. So that's just something to think about. So yeah, more people have walked on the moon. Like, that's a pretty elite club. So, I mean, then the point suddenly you're like, wow, okay, I get it. I get why you want to do that. That means something. And you will have students like that. You will have students that if you tell them there's a maximum of 600 points that can be earned in the course, they're going to ask you how they can earn 632. Because they need to be, that person that, is always on top. So, again, points, that's my little rant. Badges, getting into badges a little bit. Progress bars are a type of badge. Okay, it's a dynamic badge instead of a static badge. But it's a badge. This is from LinkedIn. Anybody use LinkedIn maybe? A few of you?
And you want to get it all the way to the
Exactly!
Mine's sitting there.
But what they do?
Mine's like 5 years old.
But what they do is really clever. Like, yeah, they know that there's going to be people going, yeah, I need to get it up there. I need to get that. But what they do is really beautiful here. They go, hey, this is something you can do. Here's my what's next that we talked about before. They tell me what to do next. Or I could come down here and I could do this one. That one gets me 10% too. That would get me up to the top. So it's not just, it's informational, but it also is giving me the what's next.
Trophies and achievements.
They've also got this why do this link.
Yes.
One of the things that's neat is they'll teach you how to maximize
Yes.
LinkedIn if you want to.
Yes. Yeah. So again, that's, maybe that's not important to you. Maybe it is important to you. And here, again, we don't have to give them all the information up front. If this is relevant to them, they go find it. Give them a link. Don't put everything up there in their face. Because for many students, that's going to be overwhelming. And that's going to, again, that's one of those things that just kind of check out on you. So anytime you have those opportunities to let them go and explore, Make them discover. Don't hold their hand through everything. Make them figure it out. And I understand sometimes they're not going to, they're going to kick and scream, and they're just like, just tell me, okay? And unfortunately, you know, for all of you, the level of students that you're teaching. Oh, hi, Bug. We had an extra student. I'm sorry, he didn't sign. Can we put him on the list so we can make sure we get credit?
And then he needs an obituary.
She inspired the student.
Yes, we've terminated that student.
Here's about to get to you, so.
Yeah, don't put
That's
that in
thank
the
you.
report.
I'm from New Orleans. That Bug hardly qualified as Bug.
Have you heard of something called Class Dojo?
Yes.
Is that, I've heard of it used at the elementary level.
Yeah, there's a Class Dojo, Class Craft. There's a few different ones. I like where they're going, but again, to me, they're a little too much just points badges. They're a little
Assigning
too-
points to assign points.
Yes, it's a little too. I mean, now again, they have a very different audience. They're working with children. We don't necessarily have, you know, they're not going to be a self-directed. They don't have the skill set to be a self-directed. So I like it. I like the fact that they're sort of giving them the visuals of knowing what to do and what to do next. That's the parts I like best, is it gives them those individual learning plans, so everything is kind of there for them. Like, there's never that moment of kind of just sitting there like, what do I do, you know, whatever. So I like them in that sense. I'm just kind of curious how they develop them out a little bit. You know, and then there's models like at the elementary level. There's models like Quest to Learn, where the entire curriculum is game-based, not based at all on points and badges and things like that. It's really project-based learning, but it's centered around some games. They do use some games as part of the curriculum. And the children design the games. This is another thing to consider with your classes. It's not always about you if you decide to use games. It's not always about you designing a game. Sometimes it's about, hey, let's learn these skills, and then how can you create a game to teach somebody else how to do this, or, you know, to practice this or something like that. So often it's about again, flipping it around. Like, we don't have to give them everything. Let's give them some resources. Let's give them some tools, some constraints and things. And let's kind of see where their mind goes, and then we can fill in those gaps. Maybe they're kind of going down the wrong path. Maybe we need to, you know, nudge them back over a little bit, pull them back over this way a little bit. But yeah, I think so. Yeah, so Class Dojo, some of those. I haven't worked with them a lot because they don't generally work a lot with elementary. I like the grown-ups, but yeah, I think all of them, and I think a lot of this is still very new, and so people are trying, and I'm all for it. Somebody's trying something a little different. I would rather see somebody try something and it not work than to just keep doing the same old thing that we know is not working. Isn't that like the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over, we know it's not working. All right, so to get to badges, I want to come back to the question over here. First of all, yeah, I think badges get kind of a bad rap. Badges are now increasingly not being called badges, but being called micro-credentials for a good reason. If you use something like Mozilla's Open Badges system, the badge is the visual representation, but what it carries inside of it, the code that it carries inside of it, is a whole schematic that shows proof of that competency. So you can actually store inside the badge, and those can be distributed through the badge backpacks and different things. You can issue those to students. You can basically email them to students, and then they can use them in various places if they choose to. But badges, I think, get a bad rap because people think they're just sort of ornamental. It's sort of the star, like it's like a star on your head and you got your star. But again, it's how you position them in your particular instance. So these badges, for instance, which I think are kind of cute, actually. These are from a product that is used for peer recognition in generally corporate environments, but flipping the whole thing around, because we think of badges as being something they get for learning a skill or something like that. In this case, badges were flipped around. Badges are issued from one participant to another. So sometimes the badge doesn't have to be a full-scale credential sort of thing. They can be sort of fun. So if a student helped one another, I've seen systems where each week, let's say, the students had either points or they had a badge or they had something that they could present to one of the other students. Like, this was the student whose responses I found the most helpful, or this student really helped me to figure out this topic, or something like that. So again, try to open your mind a little bit to how they're used. Yeah.
Can we award the bug squisher badge?
You can award them, and I can if I could take it off the screen and bring it to you, I would. I didn't even notice that. Thank you. Ta-da! That's so perfect.
Question.
Yes.
When you're doing this peer recognition and some of this other
Yeah.
badges, I don't know, maybe it's the nurse in me, that there would be isolationism, some people wouldn't get it, and then they'd be hurt, because there's always somebody in the class that's not
And
really
there's a
achiever,
possibility.
or who doesn't like to play.
Yeah. And again, that's always, again, this goes back to your audience. Is my audience an audience that this will even play with at all? It just may not be. It may not be an appropriate thing. For yours, it may be more important that they got the micro-credential, not the badge, showing that they can develop the competency in that particular very specific element, or something like that. For another group, if what their problem was that they were trying to solve was maybe they didn't have enough camaraderie in a team or something like that, and they were and the beauty of what they try to do here, and again, to that point, what they try to do here is they try to make them different enough that you try to encourage that, okay, maybe this person really isn't good at whatever that thing is, but maybe they were really helpful, or they showed the most persistence of, trying to get that skill, or maybe that's one way you can kind of try to nudge it a little bit, but that is certainly an issue with any of these things of, how to be careful. You don't want to be more demotivated. If somebody's already struggling, you don't want to, push them down even further or whatever. But this could also be combined. It doesn't have to be all peer recognition. So maybe you have a student who isn't getting the peer recognition, but maybe you see that they are done, they have some accomplishment that you can, so it could be sort of the recognition could be coming from, the peers, it could be coming from you, it could be coming from, if you sort of build in a little flexibility there, you can kind of,
Make sure everybody gets them.
Yeah, you can kind of do that. So yes.
So I've got an immediate response. I really
Yes.
agree that it's really important to make sure that folks aren't excluded or left out or ignored or what have you. One thing I have found, I haven't figured out the badge yet, but I do have my students brag on each other a lot, just a lot.
Okay.
And one thing I find is that really that students will think about that and will do that themselves. They'll make sure to include, the folks. I'll end up partnering one of my strongest students with one of my not very strong writers, and the strong student will find something that they do really well, especially because, and with badges, this would be another way to do it, but one of the things I train my students in throughout the semester is bragging on each other, or noticing when something is good, so they can notice it in their own stuff. And so that's one thing, is I think that the students themselves will be your ally in not including everybody, but also, quite frankly, someone might say, oh, I loved your introduction, and I'm like, no, that was not the way I wanted that introduction done. No. So one thing I might do, I want them to contribute to each other's badges, but I would have them, in some cases, for technical things, send it to me. And then I'd go, oh. And if I agreed, yes, there's a badge. If I didn't, I wouldn't.
Yeah,
but it
you
would
can
be-
moderate.
Yeah.
Again, any of these examples we're talking about today can be tailored and, you know, twisted and you know, into what would work for your people. Because yeah, you have a very different learner population than she does maybe, and so what works over here. No, but you know what I mean. I mean, there's going to be some similarities, but just, you know, you may find that based on the topic, based on the people, whatever, that you want to approach it a little differently. Yes.
So-
Go back over here.
Just a comment on badge for everybody, because I think it depends on the context in which the badges are being given. Because I know when my daughter was younger, and she was in this team, and they worked really hard to win the prize, and then they went up there to get the prize, and then the adult came out, oh, everybody gets a prize, and it totally dilutes
Yes.
the effort
Yes.
that it took
Yes.
to win. You know, if everybody's getting a prize, why did I put all
Why
the
did I put
effort
the
into
effort
it?
into it? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, any of these things have to be. We have to weigh them out, and we kind of have to say what's the good, what's the bad of it.
It also goes to
Everybody
the,
is equal.
it also goes to the, you know, you don't say to kids, oh, you're so smart, because, or, if they give you a picture, oh, this is the best picture I've ever seen, and it's like, but I go to art museums with you, and I know that my art isn't as good as what I see in the museum. As opposed to, oh, that's the best butterfly you've ever drawn. So you've got to find ways to
Yes.
tailor it to their specific
Right.
situation.
Yeah.
So that not everybody gets one. Well, everybody gets one, but they get something for something they truly worked for.
Exactly. I was just saying. That's usually where the mistake comes with badges. If the badge is given for every single thing, oh look, you clicked on the button, you get a badge. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, right? But the badges, when they represent an actual accomplishment, okay? And again, I do like the peer thing as well. That may be in that fuzzy area. It may not be accomplishment. It may just be, you know, a little softer there. But I like the moderation idea. But badges generally, if I encourage people to use them in any sort of system that they're doing, it has to represent an accomplishment. We're not. You can recognize participation. You can recognize that they're trying. You don't reward until they have accomplished. And the badge is the reward. So recognize that they're trying. Recognize that, because if you don't recognize that, that's another place that they're just going to go, whoa, okay. Nobody even cares if I'm even here. You know.
So the other thing I have about badges, like Words with Friends has badges. And for a while I was going, yeah, I gotta get the badge. And then after about 3 or 4 weeks I went, so what do I do with these badges?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's all they're for?
Exactly.
I don't care anymore.
Yeah, so that's back to the whole issue of meaning. And it has to have meaning within the context. So for example,
If I got badges and I actually got extra points, or I got extra games, or then maybe I would
Then
keep
you-
trying for them. But they were, oh, you have a badge.
right, again, okay, but here's a more practical example. Okay, again, I'll go back to my Microsoft teaching days. Okay, I taught PowerPoint. And that was a big struggle for a lot of people, because some people are just not very visual. Some people who aren't good at other things are great at PowerPoint because they are visual, and that just makes sense to them, and they like making pictures and things. So PowerPoint was a competency. It was a skill that they could learn and they could get a badge for. Okay, and you know, some firms I worked at, they're like, you know, yeah, badges. Right, we're not doing that. I had one firm that actually said, you know what, our people would love it if we put ribbons. We could actually ribbons on their desk, because then when people walked down and they saw the different people, like, oh,
That person, that's
they
cool.
were that. Wow, that's pretty cool. And so what they used badges for when they started building teams was, well, I need somebody on my team that's good at PowerPoint. So then the badge meant something, because now the badge signified that I had a skill that could work on this team and could go together. And the badges, again, but the badges had to mean something. So you might have I can't remember all of them they had, but they had them for like different applications. They did have certain ones for things like customer service. If somebody was just a really good, they knew how to navigate all the departments and work with people. Maybe they, you know, you need that person on your team. Maybe if you're doing a big distributed team, you need the technical people, but you need the people, and you need all those things. And so now the badges were a way of signifying that credential, that I had that skill, and you can build your teams that way. So increasingly, I think badges will come back into favor a little bit as they become more the micro-credential. And like I said earlier, you can actually put into some of these badging systems, like open badges, you can actually put, and students can actually now link portfolio items so that if they have a badge on their LinkedIn page or their website or their whatever, and somebody clicks on it, it can actually take them to examples of their work or things like that. So now badges become
of what it took to get there.
exactly, because that's a real proof of,
That's one.
you know, that's very meaningful. So I think badges, again, there's a lot of people sort of trying things, and I think it's an interesting space right now. I don't know that anybody has the perfect answer, but I do like sort of that direction that some of it's going. I think that'll be something to kind of watch. But yeah.
So I was thinking about the building teams thing,
Yeah.
because this is an idea I've been playing with, because like when you're in a game, sometimes you want the archer and the paladin and the healer.
Yes.
and
And all your
you need your different people. And so, you know, I haven't figured out this because, you know, like in math class, there's so many learning objectives that everybody's supposed to have. But I think it would be so cool, you know, if you could have you're the archer, and you do things this way. And you could be on a team, kind of like you were saying, well, they've got the PowerPoint badge, so I want on my team. Except we gotta have a way that we can
share.
have a badge travel.
That's the
Some way
problem.
we
Yeah.
don't have a, we don't
Without
have
having
an
an
external
external
program.
Right.
We don't have a means of distribution and holding the badges
Well,
on the student.
Blackboard does
Not
have,
ours.
But it's only within a class.
yeah, I know, but I'm wondering if,
And I
Yeah,
don't
it
think ours
it does if you buy the package.
yeah, so
right,
they have
it's
certain
a
packages you can add on and do
Yeah.
the like tournaments and the achievements and different things. Yeah, I mean, you could do, I mean, for some things like I was laughing because you took me over to if you had badges, there's something to the social proof. If you issued badges to students and you had an area in the learning, in the center or something, and it's sort of like, oh, this is, you know, sort of that, you know, this is our sort of wall of honor kind of,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
then do you
something.
get in, if they're actually credentialed, do you get into FERPA?
Yeah, well,
That's another
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Designer release.
Also, I consider it wall, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of different variations to kind of sort of bridge the gap between what's possible now and what's coming.
What I'm planning on doing for my class, right now I have, because I use Google Classroom, so we use Google Drive, and I have an online portfolio for each student. So I could put badges in there, but because we use the classroom, could put an announcement in there each time they earn
Absolutely.
a badge, so that it's kind of sharing with the
Yeah,
other students.
which is
as
kind of
well.
what, when she was asking about Class Dojo and some of that's some of those features they have built
Similar.
into some of those things is, you know, it sort of gives those notifications of, you know, let's celebrate that, you know, the skill was learned or, you know,
Right.
whatever. So yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I've seen people do things like, you know, for internal groups, you can have a closed Facebook group, or you can have, you know, you can find those little virtual safe spaces that kind of get around some some of the restrictions and
Yeah,
limitations.
but if it's a closed Facebook group, then it wouldn't be a violation of FERPA.
Yeah. So I mean,
There's still
so
some issues.
yes,
Like,
that's
I
why I'm
used
catching
to-
you about like.
I used to teach online through Google Hangouts, and that was apparently a concern.
Yeah, there's still some concerns with it like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a difference, and then there's a difference of, are you using this as a credential badge versus, you know, within your class, like sort of, you know, maybe as part of the learning journey, we're kind of collecting these experiences, and the badges represent completion of different things. That there's no, you know, that's a safe area. There's no issue with it there. So yeah, it's kind of, you know, just didn't have those messy requirements. It would be a lot easier. But yeah, I would keep, you know, if you're really interested, you know, keep an eye out for what Open Badges is doing and things like that, because they're really trying to they're trying to solve that. They're trying to figure out, like, how do we let this travel, yet, you know, be credentialed, and because that increasingly is just a huge sting for employment. Let's face it. Being able, you know, employers would rather see the proof, the evidence of what you can do, rather than the degree you have. You know, obviously, Stanford degree is still going to be a Stanford degree, and people are going to, you know, recognize that. But even what's his first name, Laszlo, that of Google, he's acknowledged in recent years that they made some big mistakes in terms of only hiring. That their hiring practices were, you know, kind of based on, you know, were you a star student at one of the top 10 schools, and that they were missing out on a lot of stuff. And so even they started to try some different things. They actually gamified their employment at one point. They took out a billboard along the highway, I think probably near Silicon Valley, I would assume, I can't remember exactly where. And it was basically a math problem.
If you could
and if you could solve the problem,
send it to his website.
Send it to the website, and you got yourself an interview. Because they wanted to see, they needed people who could do. Not people who had the piece of paper, they needed people who could do whatever the thing was. Okay. Didn't guarantee you a job, but you know, it was an interesting, again,
Good filter.
it's a really interesting way to reach some people that you normally would not have ever considered or ever reached. All right, this was just another example of the badges, and again, the little mystery what they are, like building in that, okay, I don't have the complete set, what is that one, you know, what do I need to do to get it, kind of thing. So play around with that a little bit. Leaderboards, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, because I think by now you all know I don't like them. Again, the main reason I don't like them is they really don't help anybody. They don't help the person at the top. They don't, you know, I mean, yeah, sure, some of them really like to see their name on the top or whatever. But it does way more harm than good, especially if it's, you know, it depends on how they're used. If it's an ongoing thing, and I walk in and I see that, you know, Jonathan's already got 5 quadrillion points, like, I'm never going to catch up. Why do I'm not going to bother, you know, whatever. Now, you can have boards that reset. Those can be effective. You can have a board that resets like every few weeks, so that those who, you know, maybe didn't try so hard the first time, didn't quite do as well the first time, they can work their way up the next time. You can do stuff like that that can be effective. You can do hidden ones. And by hidden, I mean they're sort of for your informational purposes. And that's sort of what I did here. This was from a class I did, and it actually had 2 leaderboards. This one was public. This one was presented to, it was basically a series of instructors. And so, like, they could tell, they sponsored students in this course, and they could tell if their student was participating or not. Okay? So, I didn't mind shaming these people. I'm just being honest. I didn't mind shaming these people. You're the people managing or, you know, instructing these people. You're in charge of them. If your person's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, shame on you. You know, I didn't mind that being public. It was only public to them. It wasn't public to the world. But it was public to everybody on this list. And so they could go in, and that's a little social pressure that I did not mind putting on them. This leaderboard, however, over here, which was much more detailed and had all these different categories and big fancy spreadsheet and whatever, this one was for the participants. And this is where I tracked what the participants were doing, and the scores they got, and the grades they got, and all this stuff. This was hidden. This was only for me. But what I would do is, I would use the point totals at the end of different weeks to make announcements. So maybe I announce, hey, you know, Judy almost caught up with Mary this week. You know, she's really on her tail. She's, you know, coming up strong. Or, you know, you use it to, you know, wow, it looks like somebody might be having a little, you know, did somebody hit a little bump in the road? Not calling anybody out, not making a big deal about, you know, singling people out or making people uncomfortable. They knew who they are if they were doing it or not. But just kind of, you know, kind of that acknowledgement of, okay, we all need to, you know, if we all work on this together, it's gonna go much better. So I used that one just for information. That was like a learning analytics kind of thing. I was using that just on the back end. I wasn't presenting that to the learners. Because the nature of this course was such that we had a lot of learners that were not going to participate. And I did not want to publicize that. Because I didn't want those people in the middle to then kind of go, no, why not bother? You know, the overachievers were going to do it no matter what. But the people in the middle, I didn't want to give them any reason to bail. I didn't want to give them any possible reason. So this was not public. They never saw this course. So, and at the end there was a prize for the top 2 people on the leaderboard. And I never had anybody question me and say, "Oh, I want to see the scores." Like, they knew who was, they knew who the people were that were really participating and things like that. So it wasn't a surprise at the end as to who won the awards or whatever. But just another alternative to leaderboards. All right, oops. All right, so quickly, we're going to do this one together because you all are such a great group, but I'm running low on time now. We're getting there. Points, badges, and leaderboards we talked about. So, if we're not going to use points, badges, and leaderboards, what else could we use? Can anybody think, we're just going to do this one out loud. Can anybody else think of something we talked about today, or something that you think we might could use that starts with the letter P, B, or L? You can just shout them out.
Postcards.
Postcards, okay, what are you going to do with postcards?
That's like your postcards from space in the previous semester.
Okay.
Progress. I was thinking about this thing where on a game map, where if you like say you have certain points that they'll get like this level needs to be completed by this date, you know, then that level will start to flash if they're going to be late or they're not going to make it. You know. Now, do I know how to do that? No, I don't know how to do that.
But that's okay.
It's a thought.
That's okay, because that's what we're here to think about today. We're thinking about ideal, high in the sky. If resources and technology weren't, what can we do? Because we can always scale things back if we have to. But you know what's really hard? What's really hard is to take a little thing and make it bigger if we didn't think big enough to start with. That's much harder. It's much easier to start with this big, grandiose idea and then scale it back a little bit if you have to. That's okay. So go big. Go big. Anybody else got one? A B or an L? Or a P?
Another P, personas.
Personas.
Role-playing, hats or
Yes,
capes
yes.
or other things that would identify identities to people portray.
Perfect, perfect. Anybody else got one? Yes.
One thing that you mentioned was about the trying, that one campus that was trying to build community and help students feel like they were part of the community was the branding.
Branding's big.
And I always laugh because there was always branding everything, but then I didn't think about it. Oh, but if you brand it and then you say, hey, come join our group, and yes, you're welcome in our group. That can be effective.
It's very effective. We're social creatures. We don't like generally to be ostracized. We like to feel like we're part of the group. We like to do what other people are doing. There's exceptions. Again, I'm not trying to make grandiose, stereotypes. All right. So, a couple of other ones. I'm just going to zip through these real quick. A couple of other ones I came up with. We talked about progress. We talked about pathways, making pathway clear. Praise. We talked about recognizing that they're trying, not rewarding it necessarily. Pleasure. It's okay to have a little fun, for it to be good. Peers. Most of these we've talked about. The branding. There's the branding. Buying. We talked about, can I buy a hint, or is there some sort of virtual currency that I can use in my class, or something like that. Let's see, some we haven't talked about. Lodestones is kind of obviously I was playing games that day, but lodestones in the sense of a lodestone being an attractive, it's a naturally magnetic, attractive stone that tracks metal. They used to use them for compasses, in case anybody's in the geek world like me, but it used to be on ships, they used them as compasses. But lodestones in the sense of, first of all, helping them find the pathway, the look and feel of things, making it attractive to them. Okay? Because don't discount that. Don't discount if something is easier to read, if something is more visually appealing, it is perceived as easier to do. People are more likely to engage with it. If it's attractive, they're more willing to kind of engage with it. So anything you can do aesthetically to clean things up a little bit. We talked about using story or legend, levels. The levels can be separate and apart from your grading scale, or they can be part of the grading scale. You have all sorts of options there. Lists, again, do not discount the power of the list. Judy was telling me the story about the statistics, the list of learning objectives. It was 4 pages long, and people were like, oh my God, it's 4 pages long. And then people were like, yes, it's all detailed here. I know exactly what I need to do.
Students were going, yes.
They loved it.
Check this off for the final. The faculty were saying,
I know I did the right things, exactly. Do not discount the power of the list. And then whether something has to be linear or not. Not everything has to be linear. Obviously some skills do. Some skills are precedence to other skills. But when possible, if you can give them a little freedom, what order they do things sometimes makes a big difference. And again, sometimes that's about how people process information. We may think, this makes sense in this order, but maybe they're having trouble with one of these skills. Rather than roadblock them, if they can try a different path, let them do things in a slightly different order, that often, then they go, oh, now I get that other thing. Now I can go back and do that other thing. That makes sense. Or maybe they have activities that, some of the activities they're doing by themselves and some of the activities they're doing with other people, that other person's not available that day. You want them to know that it's okay for them to proceed without doing that, because sometimes they'll stop. They're like, oh, my partner wasn't available. I used to get those calls. Well, my partner wasn't available today. Okay, was your brain not available? They're like, you can still keep going. Like, nothing's stopping you. Come on, let's go, let's go. I didn't say it like that. That was like that was the inside voice that snuck out there. So, anyway, so something to think about. And we talked about this earlier. Is there a way to provide them with some hints or nudges? And with the technology, we have more options with that now. Had to pick on the millennials a little bit. Or a hall pass. Like I said, this is a very powerful one for a lot of people. The idea of deadlines, especially if you're talking with adult learners and from the ages that you all put in your personas. You are not dealing with college students that are straight out of high school. They're not 18 years old. They may be in their 20s, they may be in their 30s or whatever. Those people tend to have more life experiences and commitments and responsibilities and things like that. And the fact that you want everything turned in on Wednesday night by, 11:59, that may be a problem for them. And that's a legitimate, I understand there's deadlines are important and all that, but is it always that crucial? If somebody really needs, and generally I know all of you are nice people, I'm sure you give them extensions, but when you build that in there for them, then they take responsibility of it. Everybody doesn't have to run to you every time and go, oh, but I need this, Fine. Do you have the points? Do you want to buy an extension? You buy the extension with your points. It sometimes simplifies that sort of negotiation.
So could you give, I kind of get what you're saying, but how would you earn those points to be able to use the hall pass?
You can earn the points, for example, okay.
What's the grade level you got?
Could be based on that. It could be as simple as, did you turn your last 3 assignments in on time? If you turn your last 3 in on time, you can get a hall pass to turn the next one in 24 hours late. And you can use it at any point up to, and you set some limitations. Can't use it for the final, can't use it, there's got to be some limitations. But when we're talking about just the weekly sort of things, is the world going to come to an end if somebody does not turn it in on that day? Usually not. Okay. And people may have legitimate, they may have legitimate things. A work thing. I had to stay at work late that night, and my boss is going to fire me if I don't, and something like that. But again, you get to make up, that's the fun part, you get to make up the rules. And as long as the rules are clearly stated up front, you don't get to change the rules mid-game. As long as the rules are fair, as long as everybody sees the rules up front and says, this is the game, this is the set of rules, then generally it runs pretty smoothly. I mean, generally, because there's always people. They're people. They're going to be people. But yeah, but you can make up commonly it's either, the ones I've seen, it's either, like I said, if you've done something X number of times, you can have a delay, or you can get so many points for maybe you completed a different activity. You can, instead of giving them extra credit points toward their grade, you can give them extra credit activities toward these. Some people call them like performance points and achievement points, or you can call them whatever you want to. It's like performance goes to your grade, but achievement are these points that are in that sort of virtual currency area. So you could, you don't want to make it so complicated that it's a whole other thing for you to manage. But if there's just some pretty simple rules, those usually don't cause too much disruption. But all right, any other thoughts or questions on that? Okay, all right. So I had you pick a random number at the beginning of class today. It was between 1 and 40 in your workbooks. There's a list of 40 game elements. It starts on page. Somebody help me here. Starts on page 27. Okay, so whatever number you picked, that's your game element. Okay. Yes, if anybody, we're adults here. If anybody needs to get up, go do something, go to the restroom, whatever, feel free, especially during these little activity periods or whatever. I'm not here to play mom or anything like that. But the point of this is just take a couple of minutes, think about the problem, even if it was kind of vague. Let's think about that problem that was sort of dancing around our head, our goal. Think about that student, that persona you created, and think about, would that game element add to or take away? Would that work with that student and that goal, or would it not work with them based on what you told me about or you came up with that story? So let's just take a minute. Yeah, so whatever personas that we're taking, our goal that we did in the first exercise, you're taking the persona that you created in the audience exercise, and now you're taking the game element from whatever number you picked on your thing, and let's start to see if those fit together at all. And they may not. It may be a totally mismatch. But the object here is we want to start to think about which ones might work with certain things or not work with certain things. And feel free, you can of course look at what the other ones are and get a feel for that. But we'll just take a minute to get your thought process going. All right, I'm going to wrap things up a little bit. With this last section, we're going to go, it's pretty short. And so, because again, the idea is, as I said, you may not have the perfect solution by the end of today, but at least this hopefully will give you a little bit more framework to think through some of these things and maybe hopefully give you some ideas to get you started. So the last piece, of course, of the game plan was the experience section. And we've talked about several of these things already because you all just had such great questions and led the conversation right where it needed to go. So again, we all recognize probably Mr. Mickey Mouse there, and Walt, and I think he embodied in many ways what I'm talking about with the experience. Not just the experience that Disney creates, because obviously that is their thing, but when he was building Disneyland originally, before it had even opened, and the construction guys were still out there and whatever, Disney, he would walk around and check everything because everything had to be exactly as he wanted it. There had to be a bird in the tree because in nature there would be a bird in the tree even if you couldn't see the bird in the tree, it was there. So everything had to be perfect because it was part of the experience. And periodically he'd walk around and he would kneel down on the ground or he would squat down or whatever. And the construction people were like, what is he doing? What is going on? And he was doing it because he said, a lot of the people that are going to be coming here are mental people. They're tiny people. I need to see what it looks like from their perspective. Okay? So sometimes we have to stop and bend down and say, how is this looking from their perspective? So it may be a perfect, you may have the perfectly constructed course if you were taking it. But you're not taking the course. Somebody else is. So always take a look. Again, we talked about this earlier. Everything does not have to be serious all the time. If I'm just checking in with the students, again, when I was talking about formal stuff here, I'm just kind of getting a pulse here. Like, how are things going today? How's that concept? How are we feeling about that? Whatever. Give them something a little different. Again, it'll kind of wake them up a little bit. It gives the class a little personality. You bring some of your personality out. Now, don't fake it. If this is not you, don't do this. Because they can see through that faster than anything. It has to be authentic. It has to be something that fits within your personality. So don't, you don't have to be a comedian. We're not asking you to be who you're not. But if you can find a way to kind of impart a little something of yourself in there, that's okay too.
Yes. Like worse than broken heart. I don't know.
I don't know what they would have been. I don't know what the scale would have been, but I just thought it was kind of
That's
funny.
actually a 1 through 10 scale. I think that's just reactions.
Yeah.
Because it's also right next to
Cute and fail don't have anything to do.
Yeah.
That's just,
But I'm just trying to,
that's just your reaction.
But I'm trying to figure out what they could have been reacting to get that range of whatever. But again, everything doesn't have to be text.
It's a math joke.
Of course.
Of course it is. Math is funny.
That it is.
Yes.
Math is funny like that. Okay. Again, this is Padlet. I mentioned this earlier. Sometimes it's worth throwing a Padlet up at the beginning of the class. Anybody using Padlet? Padlet. P-A-D-L-E-T.
I've tried.
You can embed it in. You can embed it into your page on Blackboard or anything as well. But what it is it's just a little quick message board, quick sort of.
Is it still free?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
You can just post a question, beginning of class or something. Get the discussion started. Have them post answers up there. This can be used. This is used a lot at the beginning of classes. You can sort of one I saw recently was instead of this was a MOOC. It was a global audience, so they weren't all in one location. And instead of saying, introduce yourself and say your name and where you're from, it was, what's your name, and give us 3 clues to where you are. One of them should be a picture. So now, just that simple thing has opened up a whole different thing. Because if I say, oh, I'm in New York, okay, then somebody might reply to that. But how much dialogue and how much conversation am I going to get from what's your name, where are you from? Not a whole lot. I might just say, oh, I've always wanted to go there, or, oh, I've been there. You might get something. But something that poses a question that kind of requires an answer, Guess where I am? That pulls you in. Okay, so sometimes it's having the learners ask the question, not just you asking the question. So something like that. And this one obviously was from a grade school, but it was kind of cute. It's supposed to be things that they were thankful for. So I particularly like this one. Charlie said, "I am thankful for water because we would die if we didn't have water." So
because that's what they make coffee out of.
Yeah, exactly. That would be his answer by grade 4 or 5. Go Charlie. So here is going back to the thing Elaine brought up at the beginning. If everything in the class is going like this, straight up like that, and I get stuck, I'm going to slide back down the hill, right? I'm going to slide all the way back down the hill. I'm going to stop playing the game. I'm out of here. Okay. So this diagram, in case some of you may or may not have seen it before, it's from the flow theory, which says, you have the challenges over here and the skills, that if you don't have the skills for something, and the challenge is very high, that leads to anxiety, because you're not equipped to handle it. If something is not very challenging, and you have high skills in it, so what you want to shoot for is, you want to shoot for this middle range. So as skills improve, the challenges increase.
Right.
But they don't have to go in a straight line. They don't have to go in a logarithmic curve. They don't have to go straight up. What you want, and what most games do, good games, many good games, is they have this nice little up and down channel. So we struggle. We have to work at it. We got it. And then we get it. We get to the top of the hill. We get it. And then, what do games often do? After you've hit a really, really hard level and you've spent weeks playing that level,
They give you
an easy one. Throw them a bone. It's okay. You can do that with your students too. Throw a softball question. It's okay. Because then that reinforces their competency. Okay, I can breathe. Okay, got over the hard part. Now I got it. Now I can, and then you start building them back up again. Now we got the next challenge. Same thing. So instead of this constant harder and harder and harder, and everything has to be just, you know, one thing after another and after another and after another. Think about the pacing of things. And this goes back to that pathway thing. Think about the pacing of things. Everything can't just bang away and be harder and harder. And give them a little breathing room there. Give them a little breathing room. And also check to make sure that we're moving at a pace, that those challenges are in line with where they are. Have their skills caught up with us, because maybe not. Maybe we gotta spend a little time. Take a little detour there. Just kind of hover in that area a little bit before we get them back up again. So that's something to think about. All right. And this is another sort of related variation of that, which is from Amy Jo Kim, the player journey. We need to think about the fact that when somebody is starting out learning something, it is a very different experience than for somebody who is an expert. And that happens within your course even, right? People start out, they're novices, they don't know anything about the topic, or maybe very little. Maybe they don't even know how to use Blackboard. They got a whole lot of new stuff here that they're confronted with. They're a newbie. They have a very different need. They may need a lot more structure down here when you're building the stuff. They need a lot more structure. Now, when we get up to here, what we want to think about is, how do I keep them doing stuff? How do I have those loops? And that's where the feedback is so important. It can't just be, you know, everything can't be read, respond. Okay, read something, respond to this, come back, blah, 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 over and over. We need a little variation there. We got to keep them thinking, keep them moving in this area as they're developing those skills. And then once they get up to this level, we got to think again, okay, how does this change how I'm approaching the learner? You may have students, and students are going to move at different paces, obviously. You may have students at that point, like your student that we're trying to figure out how to get her to talk. But she's got a lot of mastery. How can we maybe get her to work with a newbie? How can we work? She has a different need at that point. She's not going to need as much structure in terms of, she doesn't need everything, spelled out, every step that she needs to take. So up here, we're thinking about something a little different. So when we build our course, and Module 1 looks remarkably like Module 10, that doesn't really respect this. Because that says that the student is the exact same, and their needs and how they're going to do things is often the same throughout. Now maybe, again, speaking in generalities, maybe that's true for a specific course. But in general, we're trying to move them toward the next thing. We're trying to move them more toward self-direction. And so we want to try to get them through that pathway.
So like once they're going from maybe regular to enthusiast, some of the sections that they had to read in different modules could be expandable.
Exactly.
So if they want to read it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it could be how it's presented. Maybe everything doesn't have to be so spelled out. Maybe in the early ones, everything is very step by step. I need you to do these 3 activities. Do boom, boom, boom. And then as it gets into the later ones, maybe that's where you offer them a little more flexibility. Okay, pick 3 of these. How does, that are in line with, where you are and the ones that interest them a little more. So you give them a little more flexibility because they have sort of earned that, freedom of, okay, I know how to learn now. I know how to learn this material. And then you start to move them more towards self-direction and give them, more information, more maybe additional options or, things like that. And again, I know some of these I'm speaking in great generalities, but again, because I'm trying to dance across many different topics here and see what would be appropriate for everybody. Just a quick little thing about failure. because I know that's a big, nasty F word. But 80% represents the amount of time the average person spends while playing a game that they are failing. Right? When you play a game, you spend up to 80% of the time failing. But you keep playing. So again, failure is not fatal. Generally, well, you might die in the game, but it's not generally. So again, going back to that idea of how we can find those little safe places for them to make the mistakes before they make the mistakes in those high stake tasks and things like that. And again, still I think rated the #1 game of all time, Tetris. One of the most addictive games ever created. Fascinating story. There's been several books written about Tetris. And so there's one called The Tetris Effect. Really amazing if you really are that geeky like I am. But the thing about Tetris is, how many people in the history of Tetris, and it was created in 1984, how many people in the history of Tetris have won the game?
Anybody?
How do you win the game?
None! You can't win the game. There is no winning Tetris. You play to failure. No one will ever win the game. There's no way to win the game. You just keep playing to failure. And yet, it is the most addictive game ever. People play it. But again, they play because they can improve. They can play to maybe get a better score than they got last time. Maybe they are playing against somebody else. A little competition, so I don't have any problem. Appropriately situated. So again, just sort of trying to come up with those safe places, and it's really interesting because this is very Eurocentric, very US-centric. The fact that I have to get up and say this. I spoke to, actually at the conference where I met Elaine, there was a lovely group of people there from Denmark. Yay, and yay! And they came to my session, and then I talked to them at several of the other events. And one of the gentlemen, he said, I have to tell you, he said, I just find it fascinating, because I was not the only session he had gone to where we talked about this notion of failure being okay. He's like, we just kind of accept that as reality. Like, we don't, he's like, that's a very US thing. I said, yeah, it is a US thing. It very much is. This, we can't make a mistake, it has to be right, we have to be better, we have to, whatever. So this is very hard for a lot of people. It is very hard for a lot of students to get used to the idea that they're not always going to be right, and they're not always going to get the right answer. And finding ways to do this can be very challenging. But a good way to do it is those little early wins, get them a little confidence, but then they need a challenge that they get stuck on. Because that's when they don't start learning until then. We don't start learning until we hit that first stumbling block. So this gets very complicated and tricky to navigate. In Dr. Jason Fox said, success is simply a failure to fail. So,
what was the name of that book? Tetris Effect?
The Tetris Effect.
Okay.
Yeah. I can get you I can't remember the author right now. But, it goes through the whole history of how they got it was fascinating. Cloak and Dagger and bizarre how they got the game and everything. Huh. And got him the whole Russian thing, and he was.
Have you seen the 4-player speedrun on that thing though?
It's
insane.
Yeah, so I was just like, but you would enjoy the book. That's all I'm saying. All right, last thing on experience. Again, I've been drilling all day. It's about the doing. It's about getting them to do more activities, more iterations of something, not necessarily grinding through the same thing, but if you can get them to do things. And this is the marshmallow, not the marshmallow challenge, it's about self-restraint that they did with the kids. This is a different marshmallow challenge. The one that proved that later if they could delay gratification, they did better in school, and that whole study. Not that one. This is a different one. This is a different one. This is Tom Wujak. He does this with teams all over the world, and particularly engineers, things like that. And so he gives them 26 of spaghetti, 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 marshmallow. And they have to build the tallest tower. Okay? And he's done this with people of all ages and all walks of life and all that stuff. And what's really interesting, is, here's the results. The people that build the highest towers, thankfully, are the architects and engineers. Okay, we can take a breath of freedom there. So they do the best. Architects and engineers do the best with this activity. Okay, but let's look at let's look at the people that do next best.
Kindergartners.
Yeah, look at the kindergartners over here. The kindergartners do really
we got
well.
this.
They don't
How
have
about
to
monster
unlearn.
day?
The business students, not so good. Why is that?
Because they're probably trying to make it harder than it is.
That's one reason. Anybody else have any other ideas?
Spatially.
They're probably doing,
Okay.
yeah, they're
Anybody
probably
else?
doing way different than what.
Yeah, they just don't care.
They just don't care. Actually, if you look at, he measures the time that they spend. He gives them 18 minutes. But in that 18-minute span, what do the business school students do? They spend most of the time
Figuring out
How
who's
much?
negotiating and,
Yeah.
and oh, well, we should do it this way, or we should do it that way, or whatever. What do the kindergartners do? They grab spaghetti and they start making stuff. So on average, they make a lot more towers, and they all fall down, and then they make another one, and that one falls down, and then they make another one, and they do it over and over and over again. And what's the end result?
More towers that stand.
More towers that stand, more success. They make better towers because they did it more. They just prototyped and did it over and over and over and figured out what didn't work. And the other people won't do that. So I particularly like the fact, though, that these CEOs, they do very well if the executive is doing the work. Then suddenly they do very well. When they have a keeper, when they have a keeper, I find that very interesting. But anyway, but the kindergartners, yes, they simply do better because they try more. They try more options. More options.
They don't have any preconceived,
And they have no preconceived.
they just jump.
Yeah. And failure, they don't have that ingrained. They don't have that ingrained failure.
If it
It's
falls
bad.
down, it's no big deal.
They
just
laugh.
try again.
Yeah, they laugh and pick it up and do it again. That was fun. Let's try it again.
Yeah, I tell my students in the math for teachers, and a lot of them, you know, they're going to be pre-K through 3 because they're scared of math. And I told them, I said, you know, don't decide you can't do math.
Exactly.
I said, look at a child learning to walk. If the child got up and fell down and said, oh, I'm no good at walking.
Exactly. Has that ever in the history of the world happened? No child has ever fallen down once and not gotten back up. It just doesn't happen that way. So yeah, so we have to unlearn. We have to unlearn a lot of stuff. All right. I'm gonna, because I can see everybody's getting a little punchy at this point. Normally at this point, I would give you a few minutes to kind of go through your whole process and see if you can come up with an idea that's working for you. But what I'm going to do instead is I am going to give you these cards. Now, if anybody, this is perfectly voluntary. I don't care if you do it or not, like Cam, but it's voluntary. I have these cards, and they say Commitment Buddy on them. And what they are is you can put your name and your email, and you can ask somebody else in this room. That somebody else can be me, but it can be one of your colleagues here. You can say, hey, you know, in a couple of weeks, I'd really appreciate it if you checked in with me to see if I followed up on any of the stuff that we did in the class today. Because for me, the biggest failure today would be if I walk out of here and I see all these bright smiling faces, and then I contact Elaine and say, how's it going? And she said, yeah, it's great. Anybody trying any of the stuff? You heard anything yet? If I haven't hopefully spurred you just a little bit to go back and try to think of something that you can try, even at the smallest level, then I kind of have failed today. And that's okay, and I'll try again. I'm one of those kindergartners. I'll pick up my marshmallow and I'll try it. But I really think it would help in adding a little bit of, we're all busy people. And the reason I do this, we're all busy people. I respect that. This is not your whole existence, your whole life here. But if anybody wants a card and wants to fill it out, and again, you can give it to me if you want to, and trust me, I nudge people. I have no problem sending cards, and I'll just throw some around the tables if anybody wants some.
About last year it didn't happen, but 2 years ago we started what we called the Gamification Guild here on campus.
Oh, nice.
And I'm not the actual guild leader, but I'm the one that sort of tries to send emails out. So I'll get the list of emails from Elaine and we'll try and resurrect it. What it is it's just a group of people on campus. It's not a committee, people. It's just a discussion group. It's the best way to describe it. So, because a lot of faces I don't recognize. Elaine was involved, Patricia and I have been involved. There may be a couple others have left. Some of the others have left, but
Tina would be here if she could.
But there's a few people who are still here that may have been involved. But what it was is we just tried to get together occasionally, whether for a brown bag lunch or half an hour, 45 minutes, and just talk to see what somebody was doing or not doing or what was happening. And so I'll try and resurrect our Gamification Guild.
Do you still, because I know Leanne ordered some books.
Yeah, we have.
Do you have some of the ones she mentioned?
I'm going to go through this and see what we've got. And
I'm happy to make other references. I just I didn't want to overwhelm, here's 27,000.
I know we have some. I don't know what we have in this batch, but I'm going to be checking.
Yeah.
So I'll be sending an email out.
Yay!
Sometime next week. Probably not tonight.
Okay. And again, the offer is open if anybody wants to contact me as well. So, but I think that's wonderful that you already have sort of a.
Yeah, well, it's real loose.
That's okay.
But it worked for a year, and I kind of dropped the ball.
Well, I mean, and our guild leader wasn't really a very good guild leader. Wasn't leading, and it was hard to get a time where everybody was involved.
So we may try another format, because finding a time is the
I was
hardest.
going to say maybe
We may just do a lunch, and who shows does it, and then do another lunch, and who shows. Like I said, it's informal. It's not.
And do you have perhaps some sort of social space where people could leave questions or comments for one another to continue the discussion while that went out? I think that would be helpful to you because with the time thing is really hard. I tried that after one of the conferences I went to last year. One of the speakers didn't show up, and a bunch of us, and it happened to be about gamification. One of the speakers didn't show up, and so all of us that were there, we already knew we were interested in the topic, and so one of the conference people came in and said, oh, if you want to go select another session, we're really sorry, speaker didn't come, whatever. And we all kind of slipped around and went, you know what, we're just going to stay here. And we made our own discussion, we just did our own little discussion group for an hour. And we tried to form a little deal really low, because a couple of people really wanted help. And some of us really wanted to help them. And but the time thing, and then, well, who's going to host it, and whatever. But at least internally, if you can get, it's a little easier, but I think definitely if you have some sort of, whether it's I'm not a big Facebook person, but I think it is good for closed groups and things like that. If you have some discussion area where people can kind of leave something even if they can't make the guild thing. So just in conclusion, I just want to tell you that this is from the research company Gartner. They do technology research and things like that in different industries. And this is what they call their hype curve. So any new technology there's this innovation stage, it's new, you get a few early adopters, you get all that stuff. It gets this peak of inflated expectations. Everybody's like, oh, this is the next best thing, everybody's going to be doing it. And then it slides back down into the trough of disillusionment. Which, as you notice, these dates, these represent where gamification falls on the Gartner curve. Okay? So right now, we're sitting here. But I think that's actually a good place to be.
Misinterpretation
yeah.
over gamification.
Yes, because I think we shook out some of the early bad stuff, the points of bad stuff. We shook some of that out, And people got a little disappointed, oh, it didn't work. And they got discouraged. But a lot of us didn't get discouraged. A lot of us said, you know what, we can do it better. What you were doing wasn't the right way anyway. We can do it better. So I think sitting here is really encouraging because now we're heading toward the slope of enlightenment and then the plateau of productivity. So when it gets here, this is where all of you come in because all of you had some really great ideas today. And if you put those into action, this is where we are going to be. Very soon, we'll be in this area up here. And then eventually, gamification sort of loses its meaning as a word, which I think is a really good thing because it's a really stupid word. But let's face it, it's a stupid word. But by the time it gets here, it's just sort of good design. Yeah, it's best practice. It's a good design at that point. Because that's really all we've been talking about today. There was not a whole lot of revolutionary information I gave you today. I apologize. There was not a whole lot that was really that like earth-shattering. I didn't cure cancer here. But what I hopefully did was show you that what you've been doing is great. And by just tweaking it a little bit, it can be even greater. And everybody's going to benefit from that. So hopefully, does anybody want to share with me that they had a takeaway from today? If you say no, I'm going to cry. No, I won't cry, I promise. Does anybody have one they want to share?
Well, I really like the whole presentation. One of the things that you reminded me is certainly to make a much better syllabus. And I will use the things that I used to use back in my other university. I think they were enlightening to students tremendously. And then also the goal that I come up, I can't wait to try that.
Well, do you mind sharing it?
It's not that interesting, but it is.
It is interesting. You're excited. No, you know what? It is. It's great because as soon as you said, I can't wait to try this, you're like lit up.
So
and everybody else is in.
I'm sorry. This will be very boring to the
No.
Let us make that decision.
Exactly.
I only shared it with Patricia. So one of the things I'm interested in is I teach mathematics, and I'm interested in the misconceptions that students have throughout the entire courses. I cover different topics.
Okay.
And so what I would like to do is address those misconceptions in sort of a game, not necessarily gamification in terms of the way that you have described it, but you have given me the leeway to be able to just take that concept and continue with that.
Good.
So I want to address the misconceptions. I want to be able to put up some problems that have been done incorrectly or have been done correctly, and give the students a choice as to, hey, has this problem been done correctly or not? And I want to take an anonymous poll, and I want to see exactly how the crowd responds to that.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that.
And then once I've done that, I'm able to then address it in the class. And then furthermore, I want to be able to assess this by having some of those elements in my assessments, whether it happens to be homework, or it happens to be worksheet or something like that. And I want to change it as I move it on to the different other misconceptions, but then still bring in some of the other misconceptions that have already been covered to see if they still make the same mistake over and over again.
Oh my God, there's so much there I love.
Right.
I still cry. I really like that.
And I would like to see that. The last thing, I'm not sure how I'm going to do, but I think I'm going to solicit some help for this. Try to see if I can keep a visual track of how they do, how they handle certain misconceptions per chapter, for example, so that they can see, well, I have all these misconceptions and now I don't anymore, and then the other ones, I had all this, but now I don't anymore, just to see how they progress. Yes. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do.
Doesn't that sound awesome?
I
See,
hope
you're
it
like, oh,
works.
I don't know, it's not that interesting. That was awesome.
He does that. He's very self-effacing.
Yes.
No, there's so much I love in there. I love in there because I love how he tied the goal back to, hey, the goal wrote my assessment for me. Now I know. And here's my pathway. And I love that. And then, the students can compare, like, what percentage of you said this was the good answer or the bad answer. And, it's not, again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm kind of like, okay, I'm checking in there. Okay, did I get the right answer? Did I not? There's just so much in there. I really love that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Does anybody else have a takeaway or something that they would share? I put a list of takeaways in the end of the workbook, but mine are lame compared to that. That was awesome.
Thank you.
You know, mine were things like, you know, leverage the power of story and make a game plan and things like that. So those are on page 41. I'm not going to read them to you because you all are very capable of reading for yourself. But having said that, I want to thank everybody for inviting me here. You all have just been like my favorite class ever. You guys really have been good, really awesome. So I like all of you. I'd give you a like if I could. I do have for you some talk to me cards, just a little quick feedback from me. If there's anything that you want to share with me, you can do it anonymously. You can put your name on it. That's up to you. If you have questions, please put your name. Otherwise, I won't have an answer. But anyway, I'll just throw a few of these out. Again, don't feel. I know so like not one more feedback form. But I do want to give people an opportunity to let me know what worked for you, what didn't work for you. Because as I said, the next class I do for someone else will be totally different than this one based on the experiences today. So thank you all so much for coming out.